The Whispers in the Water by E.J. Moore. Part 1. Auditory Pareidolia. The tendency of the brain to perceive familiar sounds, such as speech or music, in random or ambiguous noises. This psychological phenomenon occurs when the brain interprets nonspecific auditory stimuli as meaningful, often due to the brain's natural inclination to recognize patterns, even when no actual pattern is present. The fish tank was the only light in the room, its soft, bluish glow casting long, rippling shadows across the walls. 3 fish drifted through the water, their movements mirroring in the shifting reflections. At times, it almost seemed like there was a 4th. Greg sat at the edge of his couch, his gaze fixed on the fish tank as the water gurgled through the filter. His eyes were heavy, exhaustion hanging like a weight on his shoulders. The tight sting of his scarred, hairless right hand lingered, a constant reminder of his failure. He lifted his mug to his lips. Decaf, of course. He hadn't had caffeine since he stopped sleeping, but the warmth of the mug and the rich, comforting taste of the coffee brought him a sort of ease. Insomnia had become his unwelcome companion, stretching the nights into endless, hollow voids. Time twisted and dragged, turning seconds into minutes and minutes into eternities. Lying in bed, he'd stare at the ceiling. Shadows shifted, his thoughts raced. Eventually, the silence swelled unbearably, thickening and folding in on itself. That's when he'd get up to watch the fish. Their slow, rhythmic movements, gliding through the water, untouched by time, offering a fleeting sense of peace. The soft, bubbling water had become a comfort, a sanctuary for his unrest. At first, it was just faint murmurs, barely noticeable, soft, indistinct sounds rising and falling with the gentle ripples of the water. He attributed them to his exhaustion, a product of his sleepless nights. But each night they grew louder, clearer, more distinct, until they began to seep into his consciousness like a slow poison. It was on the 74th hour of relentless wakefulness in his most recent bout of insomnia that the murmurs had become whispers. And the whispers, undeniable. Stumbling out of bed, his mind foggy with exhaustion, he wandered toward the bathroom. As he passed the tank in the living room, something stopped him. A strange feeling, as though something about the tank had changed. He blinked, rubbed his eyes and stepped closer, squinting. Was it bigger? No, brighter. The colors were sharper, somehow more vivid, but it was hard to focus. His gaze slid over the tank like it was out of place, an unsettling presence in the dim light. The whispers returned, a low, gravelly mandala of voices echoing inward. He froze, his heart thumping like fists on a locked door. One voice rose above the rest, sharp and cold. "Beware! Bridge!" Greg chuckled nervously, the sound hollow in the dim room. "What?" he asked to no reply, eyes locked on the tank. He poured himself another cup of coffee and sat on the couch to watch the fish. Part 2. The next day, on his way to work, the bridge Greg usually crossed was closed off. He pulled over to ask a police officer what was going on. A car had plummeted off the old bridge. A family of 4 was dead. An anchor of nausea dropped in his gut as a cold sweat beat at his brow. Images of a raging fire flashed through his mind. Again, the thoughts slithered through, unwanted but familiar, as if it had always been there waiting. Even if he had told someone about the whispers, who would believe him? Dragging himself through his shift at the grocery store, Greg's body moved on autopilot while his mind raced. The scar on his hand throbbed, a phantom heat licking at his skin. He bagged groceries, stocked shelves, answered customers, but none of it registered. By the time his shift ended, it was as if it never happened. Later that evening, when he got home, the whispers returned, more insistent and eerily familiar. He could have sworn he heard his mother's voice, or maybe his childhood neighbors somewhere tangled deep into the layers. Watch, escape. No, watch TV, he said, retreating into a movie, trying to drown out the noise. But the voices persisted. Eventually overwhelmed, he opened his window to get some air. Startled, he saw his upstairs neighbor clinging to a crumbling section of the fire escape. He leaned out, hooking his arms around the neighbor's legs, and yanked, tumbling backwards into the apartment. As they both fell to the floor, breathless, his neighbor muttered, "Thanks, man. I've been telling that lazy-ass maintenance guy for months now that escape was a death trap." "Yeah," Greg replied without listening, staring towards the ceiling with a faraway gaze. Uh, well, all right, man," the neighbor said, coming to his feet. "Thanks again." "Cool tank," he pointed as he chuckled nervously, leaving the apartment. The whispers fell silent, but he could no longer pretend they weren't there. A frozen bolt of excitement shot down his spine. "I can help," Greg muttered, as a faint glimmer of hope formed in his eye. So he decided to listen. The whispers remained vague. Things like, "The storm is coming," or "They've seen it." He bought a notebook and began meticulously cataloging the cryptic phrases. With each new whisper, his obsession grew deeper. He had heard stories of people being touched by some cosmic force, granted forbidden knowledge, or divine guidance. He was convinced, or at least deeply hoped, that's what was happening.